He conceived nature to be a woman with a deep aversion to tragedy. He threw a pine cone at a jovial squirrel, and he ran with chattering fear. High in a treetop he stopped, and poking his head cautiously from behind a branch, looked down with an air of trepidation. The youth felt triumphant at this exhibition. There was the log, he said. Nature had given him a sign. The squirrel, immediately upon recognizing danger, had taken to his legs without ado. He did not stand, stolidly bearing his furry belly to the missile, and die with an upward glance at the sympathetic head.
You're in a passage right now that I want you to write down in your notes called Crane's Naturalism. Naturalism. Crane is very interested in the idea that the world is a world of nature. And we're going to play a game now of noticing how he was afraid and ran away, right? But now he's going to mess around with this squirrel, and guess what the squirrel does when he throws something at him? He runs away, doesn't he? See how it plays a similar kind of game, right? So we're playing a very similar kind of game here. Crane's, again, naturalism. Crane is a famous naturalist writer, okay? For those of you who have had your junior year and have listened to Crane's text, Open Boat, you know a similar kind of story, a game is at play there as well. Thank you, Miss Larry. Okay, 5 more minutes. Let's concentrate now.
We are on page 52. 53. Okay.
Evans, on the contrary, he had fled as fast as his legs could carry him. And he was but an ordinary squirrel, too. Doubtless no philosopher of his race. The youth wended, feeling that nature was of his mind. She reinforced his argument with proofs that lived where the sun shone. Once he found himself almost into a swamp. He was obliged to walk upon bog tufts and watch his feet to keep from the oily mire. Pausing at one time to look about him, he saw out at some black water a small animal pounce in and emerged directly with a gleaming fish. The youth went again into the deep thickets. The brushed branches made a noise that drowned the sounds of cannon. He walked on, going from obscurity into promises of a greater obscurity. At length he reached a place where the high arching boughs made a chapel. He softly pushed the green doors aside and entered. Pine needles were a gentle brown carpet. There was a religious half-light. Near the threshold he stopped, horror-stricken at the sight of a thing. He was being looked at by a dead man who was seated with his back against a column-like tree. The corpse was dressed in a uniform that had once been blue, but was now faded to a melancholy shade of green. The eyes, staring at the youth, had changed to the dull hue to be seen on the side of a dead fish. The mouth was open. Its red had changed to an appalling yellow. Over the gray skin of the face ran little ants. One was trembling some sort of bundle along the upper lip. The youth gave a shriek as he confronted the thing. He was, for moments, turned to stone before it. He remained staring into the liquid-looking eyes. The dead man and the living man exchanged a long look. Then the youth cautiously put one hand behind him and brought it against a tree. Leaning upon this, he retreated, step by step, with his face still toward the thing. He feared that if he turned his back, the body might spring up and stealthily pursue him. The branches, pushing against him, threatened to throw him over upon it. His unguided feet, too, caught aggravatingly in brambles. And with it all, he received a subtle suggestion to touch the corpse. As he thought of his hand upon it, he shuddered profoundly. At last he burst the bonds which had fastened him to the spot and fled, unheeding the underbrush. He was pursued by the sight of black ants swarming greedily upon the gray face and venturing horribly near to the eyes. After a time, he paused, and breathless and panting, listened. Imagined some strange voice would come from the dead throat and squawk after him in horrible menaces. The trees about the portal of the chapel moved solemnly in a soft wind. A sad silence was upon the little guarding edifice.
Okay, we'll finish up there. We'll start with chapter 8 tomorrow.
One of the interesting observations about Red Badge of Courage as a work of war fiction is that Crane wrote this book long after the Civil War. He himself never saw a single battle of the Civil War. And yet veterans of the war, men who had lived through the battles of Gettysburg and elsewhere, reported when they read his portrayal of events in the war that Crane had done a very good job. They said it was like he had been there, but he had never actually seen any of those battles.
That's because he probably did his research.
The other side of this, of course, right, Mr. Bolts makes a fine point about research. The other side of this is that often Red Badge of Courage is a book read by people who are interested in knowing what is it like to be in the middle of the battle when everything is going and the shooting is happening. Some of us are familiar with playing video games where guys are shooting at guys and all of that, and the bad guys are all coming right and all of that. Notice how Crane makes it very personal, isn't it? Very personal as the young boy is stuck in the middle of the battle. Again, for your notes, note the irony. The young boy wants to go off to war. He wants to be a hero. He's a little bit worried about what's going to happen when the bullets start flying. And guess what he does? He runs. Of course, an interesting 3B question, a question about ourselves might be, what would you do in the middle of a battle where everyone is starting to, get freaked out? Would you sit there and stay with it, or would you run? See? And the ways in which we try and be kind of like heroic, but then not so much. Mr. Bolts, you had an observation.
I'd be running. I don't believe in running.
Running seems to be the natural thing to do, doesn't it? Right. And notice this is as well the difference in the text maybe between old people and young people. The older soldiers have been through it maybe once or twice before, and as we get into this novel, we'll see that in fact the young boy does actually kind of grow up, doesn't he? Yeah,
I wouldn't even last as long as he did.
And then
someone died.
Yeah, and then the other one, right, and then the other one, I'm always unsure about this one as well. See, and then it says there, and then I hit it again. And then it kind of cools down. Okay, we are now ready to go, and Mr. Dooley is already there in front of me. We're all ready to go now to the Psalm of Life annotations. Let's go ahead and take out your old annotation from your last packet. This will be the last time that you will be working on that work. And what I'm going to ask you to do today is I'm going to look for these notes on that annotation handout. I'm going to look for these notes on the right-hand side where I want you to put today's date of June the 10th. And then we will be prepared for our last of these, working in red ink. Excellent, Mr. Drake. The last of these notes from the famous poem, Psalm of Life. In this world's broad field of battle. How are we going to say this word again? In the what?
Bivouac.
Bivouac of life. What did we say a bivouac was?
The best word ever.
It is a great word. It is a great word. Mr. Bolts likes bivouac. Well done, Mr. Bolts. Bivouac is an encampment, a tent in the middle of the battle. In other words, Longfellow is going to say, are you ready for this at 3A? Longfellow is going to say, Life is kind of like being in a battle where all kinds of things can happen. Now let's keep going, shall we? Trust, are you reading with me? Trust no future. Howe'er pleasant. You should be looking right now at your poem. You ought to have it in front of you, and you should be working with it. Mr. Drake, do you have your poem? You want it to be looking at it. Trust no future. Howe'er pleasant. Ere here simply howe'er means however. Howe'er pleasant. What's that mean? Put it in your own words on your notes. Trust no future. Howe'er pleasant. Don't count your chickens. What's the famous phrase? Don't count your chickens before they hatch. You got it. In other words, don't always assume that the future is going to be great because the present is great. Let the dead past bury its dead. If you don't always think about the future and hope for the best, also don't worry about the what?
Let the past be.
Right, don't worry about the past. Now, Longfellow points out something interesting at 2a, real quickly. Longfellow points out that most of us live in one of two places. We either live in the future, thinking about what's coming, or we live in the past, worrying about the past and our choices and that kind of thing. Notice how he says we should live. Act, you might underline these words from your poem. Act in the what? Circle it and then write it down. In the living present. Heart within and God o'erhead. So let's now work with this stanza real quickly. Longfellow says there's one of three places where you can live. One, in the future. The only problem with the future is you really don't know what's coming. Two, you can live in the past. What's the problem with living in the past? You can't undo the past. Some of us would say on a Monday morning on the 10th of June, geez, I really wish I didn't have to be here. Now I start thinking about why I have to be here, and all of a sudden there's all this stuff that starts. Now we're thinking about the past. Longfellow says you can do nothing about the past. It is in the past. It is gone. Bury it. It's an interesting word picture. Bury your past. It's over. And there's no point in holding on to it. There's no point in digging up the past over and over and over again. It isn't healthy, he says. Well, if you're not going to constantly be looking in the future, and you're not constantly worrying about the past, the only third place you can be is the present, which is where you should be, he says. Act in the, notice what he calls it. What's the adjective? What kind of present? You do realize all you've got's right now. That's all you got, right? You can't go back in the past, and the future never actually gets here. Have you noticed that? The future never actually gets here. By the time the future gets here, it's always the present. You're never actually in the future, correct? You can dream about it, you can think about it, but it's never actually here. It's always the present. In other words, students can waste all of their time thinking about the future or worrying about the past. I'm reminded years ago of taking my little daughter, who just recently graduated, Annie. But Annie, I took her to that famous amusement park in California where all the roller coasters are. She was so excited. For weeks, she had been jacked up about going to this roller coaster park where you rode, Mr. Armstrong, you could get on these stupid rides 1,000 times. And yes, I had to get on them. And, they have large signs about make sure your heart is in proper condition before you drop out of 135 feet in the air, etc., etc. You'll be hitting 4Gs, etc. Right, I was obviously very excited as I was going. We walked into the park in the early morning. We knew we were going to be there for almost 12 hours. As a father, I was already getting myself mentally prepared for this. And I noticed my Annie went from extreme excitement to almost like sadness. Annie was only 7 or 8 years old. And I said, Anne, what's the problem? And she said, I'm getting sad. And I said, what do you mean you're getting sad? She said, I'm getting sad because I'm going to have to leave this place. See, she was already thinking into the future when she was going to have to walk away and go back to the van and it would all be over. And the fact that she was going to have to leave the park made it sad that she was at the park. To which then I made an observation. Trust no future, however pleasant. This is what sucks about having your dad as an English teacher, huh? Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present. Heart within and God o'erhead. Hey, honey, we're at the park. Let's have a good time at the park and not worry about the fact that tomorrow you won't be at the park. Hear how that works? Lives of great men all remind us. We're now ready for the interesting word picture. We want to take a look at it. I'm reading from your poem. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, you ought to be reading it with me now, following along with your pen even. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing shall take heart again. Now, I love to be able to teach poetic lines that seem a little bit difficult and obscure. Because once you understand them, you never forget them. And once they start out seeming really complicated and complex. But they actually end up being very, very simple. Now, for your notes, let's point out something at 3A real quickly. What Longfellow is doing here is he's playing a little game. He's playing a game, a reference to a very famous novel. The name of the novel was called Robinson Crusoe. Now, some of you know about this novel, not because of Robinson Crusoe, but rather because Tom Hanks made a famous movie called Castaway. Very similar storyline. Robinson Crusoe is a story about a guy who ends up shipwrecked on an island. And are you ready for this? Everybody else on the boat dies. He is the only one stuck on an island all by himself. And he has no expectation that anyone will ever come and rescue him. After several months there, it finally occurs to him, I will live and I will now die on an island all alone. I will never see another person. I will never speak to another person. And I'm a relatively young guy. I've got to find a way to sustain myself. And he does. He sets to going to work. He builds an amazing structure for himself to live in. He begins a process of trying to figure out what he's going to do with his days because he doesn't have anyone to talk to. He doesn't have anyone to tell him what to do. One afternoon, he's walking on the other side of the island. He decides, you know what? I need to walk all the way around this island just to make sure that it is an island. Maybe it's not an island. And he starts walking. And as he's coming back around the island, all of a sudden, on the sand in front of him, footprints. And we're told that Robinson Crusoe freaks out. First with tremendous joy. Yes, there's somebody else is on the island. I'm not alone. Then it's the oh poop moment. Oh, poop. Who else is on the island? You see, because of course he goes from excitement to fear, right? Because if there's somebody on the island, maybe they can hurt me. Maybe there's more than one person, etc., etc. Well, ultimately, Robinson saves his pal, young Friday. They're headhunters. They're cannibals. And they've come to the island to commit a sacrifice and take this poor chap's head off. Robinson is able to save him.
the point that Longfellow now will make is, sometimes in life we feel totally alone. But we're not alone. Now go back and read the lines. Lives of great men. We would say today, wouldn't we, great humans, both men and women. Lives of great people all remind us we can make our lives sublime. We want to circle that word, sublime, on our poem. Sublime. What does that word mean to you, Mr. McAfee? Do you have a definition for us of sublime? Would you say, first of all, good or bad? Good, definitely good. In what regards good, though? Sublime means what? Does anyone know this word? What would you say, Mr. McAfee? How would you say it? Excellent, Mr. Drollinger says. Excellent. Do you have another word that goes along with that one, Mr. McAfee, you like? Sublime. Excellent. The very best. Go back and look at the line again. Lives of great people all remind us we can make our lives the best. Sublime. And now we're getting to Robinson Crusoe. This is way cool once you know the story, right, Mr. Winlock? And departing, leave behind us footprints. What? On the what? Footprints on the what? Sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another sailing o'er life's solemn main. Main here just simply means the ship. Right? Footprints that perhaps another sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, see, shall take heart again. What's the word picture? Well, you live your life. The word picture is living your life is like walking on the sands of time. You leave your footprint there. Somebody else's ship gets wrecked. They see your footsteps in the sands and know, I'm not alone. Somebody else has done this. I can do it just as well. See how that works? Now, let's go ahead and put it in normal language. Your life can be a model to other people. Now, this one blows the minds of a lot of my students, Mr. Drake. Think about it for just a second, though. Are you prepared to say, and Mr. Brazel, this can be an unsettling question, but we'll ask it nonetheless. Are you prepared to say right now to a bunch of third graders, when you grow up, when you turn 16, 17, 18, I want you to be just like me. I want you to live the same life I live. I want you to make the same choices I make. I want you to talk the same way. I want you to walk the same way. I want your life to look like my life. Are you prepared to say to third graders, I want to be the example, the model for you. I want you to live the way I'm living. That's what I'm doing. I'm living my life so that third graders can. Some of you will say, dude, no, that is not what I'm doing. And I will say back to you with Longfellow, you have no choice. Third graders, watch high school sophomores and juniors and seniors to learn how to act. That's how you, are you ready for this? See, and this blows the minds of some of my students. It never occurred to you when you went to a high school football game and you were 10 years old. You weren't watching the game. You were watching high school students. How do they walk? How do they talk? How do they exchange? From the time you were 5, you were watching other people to learn how to act. It started with the people who raised you. It started with brothers and sisters. It started with friends of brothers and sisters. It started with friends of parents. And then your circle grew larger and larger. When you were in elementary school and you were there as a third grader, you were watching fourth graders. When you hit the fifth grade in middle school, you watched the seventh and the eighth graders. When you finally hit ninth grade, you watched high school juniors and seniors. That's the way we live our lives. You learned how to decide what kind of person you would be by watching somebody older than you. You are being watched right now in your life. See, now Miss Mitchell says that is a scary thought. What you did last weekend was watched by somebody younger than you, who looked at you and then said, well, if she can do it, I can do it. If he does it, it's okay for me to do it. Very disturbing observation, but there's a flip side. See, you're missing it. It's interesting to me how when we come across Longfellow's idea, the first is the oh poop, they're watching me. We fail to miss what Longfellow's really saying. He's not saying you're living a crappy life and third graders are going to grow up to live a crappy life too because of you. That's not what he's saying. Go back and look at the lines again. Lives of great men and women all remind us we can make our lives sublime. And departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. If you have not lived to this point a life you're proud of in front of third graders, you have today to start again. You have tomorrow to start over. It's right about now that one or two students in summer session understand why Psalm of Life is the text we lead off with. Makes sense? Does, doesn't it? Yeah, because it's very simple for us to wake up one morning and realize I am not living the kind of life that a third grader would want to watch to learn how to be a high school junior. This is not the way I want my third graders who are watching me to live. I will change. I will live a different life so that by the time they get to be high schoolers, they'll have some idea of what it means to be a hero in the strife, as opposed to being a stupid cow that walks down the halls of the high school wanting to be like everyone else. Isn't that fascinating? See, that's interesting. Notice how this poem can start playing games with your head. Last weekend, we just finished it. Over the weekend, were you a cow or were you a hero? See, that's a simple question. And you get to decide. You get to make up your own answer to that question. Did you live your life to say, whatever happened last weekend, I'm very proud of that because I can turn around and say to any third grader, when you grow up, I want you to be exactly this. On the other hand, if you feel a sense of shame about that, like, geez, I made some stupid choices and my life has been basically one long line of stupid choices. I don't want no third graders growing up to look and sound like me. Then the answer is CHANGE. Right? Yeah. Yeah. In other words, if you're ever going to live a life that you can be proud of in front of a third grader, when are you going to start? Because you're not a third grader anymore. You're about to become a high school graduate, and then you've got the rest of your life to live. And the whole time you're living, people who are younger are watching. And Longfellow says, that's not bad, that is good. If you live a good life. If you live a hero's life. If you live a life in the present. Now that you know the word picture, you can go back and look at these two stanzas and it can waken for you a pretty powerful word picture. Lives of great men all remind us. We can make our lives sublime. And departing, leave behind us footprints in the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another sailing or life's Solomon, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing shall take heart again. Longfellow says if you've made bad choices, you cannot undo the past. You can't. Beating yourself up feeling lots of shame and guilt does not change one thing about your past. Not one. Not one. So, it's a waste of energy. Instead, go forward. And in going forward, try and live your life in such a way that you leave behind footprints. What kind of footprints will you leave in the fall of the year coming up? What kind of footprints? Whatever they've been in the past, you can do different if you want. See, it's all up to you. Final stanza. Let us then. See, Longfellow's going to bring this poem home with a resounding exhortation. What's an exhortation? Do you know what that term means? To exhort means to encourage. In other words, to say, hey, let me give you a challenge. Let's write it in our notes. Longfellow's challenge. Let us then be up and doing. Some students have said, Mr. Drake, you know what? I spend half my life asleep and the other half of my life half asleep. It's time I wake up. Look at the lines. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still, and some of you will circle these words, achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. Now there's a whole lot here, Mr. Hernandez, in this final stanza. Longfellow is going to challenge us, first of all, to wake up. We are, Thoreau will say, like zombies. Right? We walk the halls of a school like driven cows. We're like zombies. I've had students who read these lines and say, you know what, it's kind of true. The only time I feel alive is in these really brief moments when I'm doing something insane. And then the rest of my life is so unbelievably boring. I mean, it's kind of like life has become the video games we play, where all they are is zombies walking around. Where all your life becomes is just kind of that half-awake, I don't even know where I am, and what difference does it make anyway? Longfellow says, your life is passing you by. If you don't believe it, go look at a picture of when you were in 8th grade. That's you, but it's not you anymore. You're getting older. So get up and go to work. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate. Some days are going to be really great. Some days are going to be absolutely crappy. Some things have happened in our life that we're not pleased about. Longfellow is going to make an observation that sounds something like this. No longer ask, why is this happening to me? When bad stuff happens. Don't ask, why is it happening to me? Learn to ask, why is it happening for me? Whoa. Some of you will say, you know what? That's an idea I think I better write down on a sheet of paper and look at. No longer ask. I remember years ago in 303, Mr. Drake, many years ago, in my room, all of my walls were covered with material and stuff. At one point, a student of mine had asked me the question, what's the one thing that you want us to all remember when we leave 303? I had him put these words on a sign, and he put it up on the ceiling of my room, so that at any given point students got bored listening to me drone on, they just looked up and they saw the words on this sign. The words on this sign, I just quoted for you. This is what Longfellow's saying. Have you noticed why when bad things happen to you, the first question you like to ask is, dude, why did this have to happen to me? That is an unanswerable question. Every time an answer comes up, another question can follow it. Stop asking, why did this happen to me? Learn how to ask, why did this happen for me? Even the worst stuff of your life can be used to make you a better person, to make you stronger. What is that famous line from Nietzsche? That which does not destroy me, what? Makes me stronger, right? Some of you have heard that line. It's now time, Longfellow says, to start living that line. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate. And now what is our life? Well, there it is. Still, what's the words? Achieving, What does that word mean to you? What's it mean to achieve something? What's achieve mean? If I achieve something, what have I done? I've gone forward, haven't I? I've accomplished something. It's a fair question to ask. What did you achieve yesterday? Name one thing you achieved yesterday. And if you say, dude, I lived 24 full hours and didn't achieve a thing, Longfellow says, but you've got now. It's called the present. You got today. Can you achieve one thing? Of course, most of you will say, hey, you know what? At least I achieved one thing. I made it here this morning, and I'm still sitting here kind of awake. And Longfellow would say, that's a good sign. You got it. Still achieving. What's the next one? Still what? Pursuing. Your life is a race where you are pursuing. You got to get up and go to work. It's not easy. It's hard work. Still achieving, still pursuing, and then what is it we got to learn? Two things. We want to write it in our notes. We got to learn how to labor. We got to learn how to W-O-R-K. That is a four-letter word, but it isn't a bad four-letter word. What's the opposite of work? Death. That's what it is. Your job is to go to work. W-O-R-K. But there's another side. You do work, but you got to learn how to wait. You got to have some patience. Life isn't going to always come so quick and so easy. I've had students that say, it's time I change my life. They work at it for 4 days, and then when things don't change really quickly, they go right back to what they were before. No. Hey, dude, you got here over 10 years of a certain kind of attitude. You will not change that attitude overnight. It's going to take a lot of work and patience. You got to learn how to hold on and wait. Does that make sense? You've been an outstanding group. Well done. You've now been introduced to Longfellow's Psalm of Life. You can now put that with your notes. You'll be handing that in to me and Miss Laird in a while. We now have a little break. We then come back to grab our computer.